Hello and welcome to Global Lens. So, over the next 30 minutes, we put the spotlight on all the top stories from around the world. I'm Parikshit Luthra. The big story moving the markets worldwide. US President Donald Trump is set to meet Ukrainian President Zelenskyy and other European leaders in Washington in a bid to reach a peace agreement with Russia. The leaders of Britain, Germany, France, Italy, Finland, European Union and NATO will be present to offer their support to the Ukrainian president. This comes nearly 6 months after President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance accused Zelenskyy of ingratitude and disrespect at the White House in February, making the televised gathering between the leaders a diplomatic disaster. Discussions between Ukraine and US become crucial as Russian President Vladimir Putin met the US President in Alaska over the weekend. However, the highly anticipated meeting did not reach a breakthrough in ending the Russia-Ukraine war. Interestingly, President Trump dropped his previous demand of a ceasefire and said that the best way to end the war is to directly go to a peace agreement. This bolsters Russia's stance that allows fighting to continue until a deal is reached. Meanwhile, Russian attacks continued in Ukrainian cities, including Kharkiv. Officials from Ukrainian military claim nearly 17 civilians have been injured and 5 have been killed. Ukrainian Air Force has also claimed that Russia launched 4 missiles and 140 drones during attacks overnight. Joining me now to discuss this further is Kanwal Sibal, former Foreign Secretary of India and also India's ambassador to Russia. Ambassador Sibal, thank you very much for joining us. You know, Donald Trump has drawn some red lines ahead of the summit, saying that Crimea will not be handed over to Ukraine and Ukraine cannot be allowed to join the NATO as well. How do you see the atmosphere in which this summit is really taking place at the White House?
It's going to be a very difficult summit in the sense that Zelenskyy has made it very clear that he is not going to agree to any territorial compromise of a permanent nature. The argument is that the Ukrainian constitution does not allow the cession of territory to anyone. There have been formulas floating that the situation can be frozen where it is without any de jure recognition of the incorporation of these territories, these 4 oblasts, into the Russian Federation. Other than that, I think Zelenskyy will not be able to remain in office if he made any territorial concession. In fact, his future would become very parlous. As it is, he's not had elections, and the Russians consider him not to be a legitimate president, etc., etc. Believe that aside. The other is that Europe is fully backing him and have taken a very hardline position in the statements they issued when the coalition of the willing met in Europe. And now they have, most of them have accompanied the big ones to Zelenskyy in Washington. So they want to make sure that Zelenskyy, 2 things. One, that Zelenskyy does not get bullied again. And number 2, that Zelenskyy is able to have a stronger hand with Trump, because he would have major powers of the European Union backing him. Right. And the Europeans are going to do everything possible to prevent the kind of solution to the crisis that Putin wants and what Trump seems to be veering towards. Because as you rightly said, he had earlier focused essentially on the ceasefire and then to begin talks with regard to a more durable peace. Now the situation has been reversed, where Trump himself has conceded that we'll go straight for a peace agreement because ceasefire agreements do not necessarily hold out. And now Rubio, just to complete that, and Rubio has now expanded on that theme, saying that the experience with the ceasefire is what it is, and therefore we must go in for a ceasefire agreement, and also no sanctions. Because if they were to impose any sanctions at this stage, this will actually mean that the further negotiations would not take place and the war will continue for another 6 months or 1 year. So the outlook is not very, very positive, I think, with regard to...
Outlook isn't very positive as of now. When it comes to land swap that Donald Trump has been speaking about, the European Union leaders are expected to argue strongly against any land swap that rewards or ends up rewarding Russia, so to say. In these circumstances, will there be any positive movement today, or will President Trump emerge out of this exercise in the next few days as more frustrated?
Well, I don't know what this land swap means, because if it means that some of the territories which Russia has now occupied in the Sumy region and the Kharkiv region, those can be returned to Ukraine, yes, this is entirely feasible, and Russia, I'm sure, would be happy to do so. But if the land swap means that you know the four oblasts are some way or the other returned to Ukraine, or that Donbass alone is kept as part of the Russian Federation, and Zaporizhia and Kherson are returned to Ukraine, I don't think it is at all feasible. It's not going to happen. There's no way that Putin and Russia are going to agree after incorporating these four oblasts into the Russian Federation post a referendum and making it formally part of the Russian Federation. There is no way that Russia will agree to this. So I don't know what this kite flying about land swap is.
Right. Ambassador Sibal, do you feel that at this juncture, it is in Putin's interest to stop the war? And is he looking for a way out or not as yet? And secondly, do the United States and European Union have any leverage over Putin at this juncture?
I would reverse what you said. I think it is the United States and Europe and Ukraine who are looking for an honorable way out where they can get some concession from Russia, because the situation on the ground is very clear. Ukraine is losing the war, and if they continue for another 6 months, actually the entire front, Ukrainian front, can collapse, and Russia can gain more territory. So in fact, what is being presented as an initiative by the West or Trump to try and find a peaceful solution, to my mind, is motivated by a much larger consideration that if they delayed further any dialogue and continue down the path on which they have been going, then in fact, Ukraine's future would become even more shaky, and Ukraine may actually lose on the military front dramatically. And therefore, something has to be done to find a peaceful solution. So I don't think it's Russia that, yes, of course, Russia will gain a lot if its demands are accepted, the fundamental demands, that no NATO for Ukraine, and that the security concerns of Russia are addressed, and there a fair and equal security balance is established in Europe, which means a limitation on the size of the Ukrainian military. Now, I don't think Russia is going to walk back from these demands.
Right. My final question to you would be about India. Now, it is clear, and the government also has said that Brendan Litch, the assistant USTR, is not coming to India for trade negotiations. They're not pursuing those trade talks with India at the moment. We're now bracing for 50% tariff. Do you think at this point, is there any possibility of an understanding between Prime Minister Modi and Donald Trump, or the two sides, to at least put aside the 25% additional tariff?
No, when you say an understanding between President Trump and Prime Minister, I'm not sure what that exactly implies. If it implies that they're going to have a conversation on the phone and Trump is going to be generous and say that, look, I'm not going to impose this, I don't think that's going to happen. Trump has already indicated in the context of China that fact that the conversations at Alaska are proceeding. He's open not to impose any penalties, the additional penalties because of buying oil from Russia. He said, well, at least for the next 2-3 weeks, something like that, he said, which means that come August 27, he would have no reason to impose these penalties on India without also simultaneously having to take a decision on China, which he's not taking because he's given himself a 90-day period to negotiate the final tariff agreement with China. So I have a feeling that he will keep this hanging in the air, but will not impose this penalty. And he'll use this to extract, further down the road, more concessions from us if he can.
Right. All right. Ambassador Sibal, thank you very much for joining us on the program. A very important meeting that's taking place at the White House, but perhaps no immediate implications or takeaways from India, and President Trump would want to maintain that leverage in the form of additional penalties on Indian goods. Let's now take a look at some of the other news in brief. External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar will travel to Moscow on the 20th of August. He will engage in high-level talks with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. The visit is meant to prepare the ground for the proposed visit by President Vladimir Putin to India later this year. Putin has not visited India since the war in Ukraine began more than 3 years ago. Israeli forces continue to bombard Gaza, killing at least 11 Palestinians. Since dawn, Hamas has slammed Israel's plan to seize Gaza City and forcibly displace its population. The militant group has called Israel's promises to provide shelter and humanitarian aid blatant deception. Amnesty International has said that Israel is carrying out a deliberate campaign of starvation in Gaza and is destroying the health and well-being of Palestinian life. Meanwhile, thousands of Israelis have demanded a deal to free captives in Gaza on Sunday. Heavy rains in northwest Pakistan halted rescue and relief operations for several hours before efforts resumed. Flash floods triggered by the downpour have killed more than 300 people since Friday, according to the National Disaster Management Authority. Several northern districts have been devastated, with most casualties caused by sudden flooding. In hilly areas, the rains unleashed mud and rock slides that swept away houses, buildings, vehicles and belongings. Time for a short break, but don't go anywhere. India-US trade talks scheduled for August 25th are postponed. Will the rift between India and the US lead to a major reset in India's geopolitical alignments? We speak to Happymon Jacob, founder for Council for Strategic and Defense Research, on the other side. Welcome back to Global Lens. India is bracing itself for an unprecedented 50% tariffs from August 27th due to the ongoing trade tensions. Ties between India and US are now at an all-time low. Remember, the 50% tariff rate is higher than that imposed on any other nations except Brazil. This comes even as India has been consistently increasing its oil imports from the US. Trump has also harshly criticized India's economic policies and strategic alignments. Meanwhile, sources have told CNBC-TV18 that trade talks with the US scheduled for the 25th of August have now been postponed. Sources have also said that the US has not changed its stance on 25% secondary duties imposed on India. Negotiations are underway between US and India about setting aside the duty. With the rift between India and the US, can progress in the partnership survive Trump? Joining us to discuss this further, we are joined by Happymon Jacob, founder of the Council for Strategic and Defense Research. He's also written a piece on whether India needs a reset in its strategic alignments in the Foreign Affairs magazine. Thank you very much for joining us, Happymon Jacob. Let me begin by asking you, what do you think the problem is between India and the US right now? Is it simply about why did India not acknowledge Trump's role in the ceasefire between India and Pakistan?
Well, it appears that much of what is happening between the United States and India today is a function of the worldview of American President Donald Trump. This is not a function of the India-US relationship. This is not a function of the structural environment in the international system. In fact, if you look at the structural environment in the international system, the United States and India need each other more than ever. The India and the United States are perhaps closer to each other than ever before in their history. So there is no reason why we should have been having this relationship, having this conversation about the rift in the relationship today. But because there is a president of the United States who seems to have a different worldview. about the international system, about India, and about the relationship. So I guess some of this goes back to what you just mentioned, which is the India-Pakistan conflict in April, May, and the Indian reluctance to accept third-party mediation and President Trump's claims about having stopped the two sides from going nuclear. I think the Trump administration was perhaps not understanding enough of the Indian sensitivities when it comes to India-Pakistan relations. And I guess this is not just about the India-Pakistan relationship or India-United States relationship. The Trump administration has been pursuing a foreign policy which has basically disrupted the certainties about alliances, certainties about relationships, and certainties about friendships. So it is not just about India and the United States in that sense.
Right. You know, in your piece, where you argue, can the progress in the partnership survive Trump? India and the US partnership has had a lot going for it over the last 2 decades. Do you think that progress could be stalled now? Because the sense that one gets by talking to people on both sides is that right now, the US may not be immediately wanting to pursue a trade deal with India. We are still looking at a bilateral trade agreement, but immediately we're not looking at trade talks.
You know, Parishit, I see this as a serious but temporary setback to the relationship. And I'll tell you why I think it is serious, because there is a trust deficit in the relationship today. There is a lot of bitterness in Delhi today. You are seeing a creeping in of anti-Americanism back into the Indian strategic elite. To that extent, I think this is a serious rupture in the relationship. But I think it is also temporary. It is temporary because the two sides need more than ever. There is bipartisan consensus in the United States. There is a certain understanding within the American bureaucracy that India is important to the regional balance of power and to some extent the global balance of power, as it were. So I think India will have to patiently wait out this storm. And at some point of time, we hope that the American establishment goes back to its default mode on India, on China, and the sort of regional balance of power. But I do think it is serious because at this point of time, the bitterness is only growing, and the Americans have not really done anything to reassure India that this is a passing phase, either through back channel, not that I am aware of, or in public statements. The Indian industrialists in the United States, Indian origin industrialists or Indian origin influencers in the United States are all somewhat quiet about the relationship at this point of time. I don't think that is going to help. And yet I would say that this is a serious but temporary setback to the relationship. As I said, this is too important a relationship to sort of abandon at this point of time, at a point of time when they need each more.
That's an important point. Serious but temporary setback. Do you feel that, and I'm asking you in the context of Prime Minister's upcoming visit to China, Wang Yi, as we speak, has landed in India. He will be meeting the NSA. He will be meeting the External Affairs Minister. Subramaniam Jaishankar will be heading to Moscow for talks. Prime Minister has spoken to Putin for a second time now in the last few days. Do you think there is going to be a reset in our foreign policy and strategic alignments? Will India, in the backdrop of what's happened in the US, at least in the temporary next few months, weeks or years, seek a greater alignment with Russia and China?
I think some of what we are witnessing today, which is India warming up to China or reaching out to Russia, has had a pattern for the last several years. There's nothing new about it. India-China sort of conversations picked up in the wake of the crisis in 2020. So there has been a steady increase in growth in the India-China relationship, strategic partnership, as it were. So I'm not really surprised about the ongoing conversations between India and China, number one. Number two, if you look at the India-Russia relationship, this has always been there. There's nothing really earth-shattering about the new outreach to Russia, as it were. I wouldn't even want to call this a new outreach. This outreach has always been there. But I would say at this point of time, the sort of flurry of activities that we are witnessing today between India and China and India and Russia is also intended at signaling the United States that India is not a country without partners. You're looking at a country that is able to have partnerships with countries on either side of the geopolitical fault line, as it were. There is an ongoing India-EU FTA negotiation that's happening. India is engaging in such conversations across the board. So I would say, while some of it is business as usual with China and Russia, there is a message here, and that message is for the United States of America that if you are going to be unfriendly towards India, India has other partners to sort of choose from and other partners to reach out to. I will also say that there's a lot of unhappiness and uneasiness in Washington D.C. about India's policy of multi-alignment and India's desire for a multipolar world. I don't think the current American unhappiness about them will change the course in Delhi on either of those two fundamental principles of India's foreign policy. India is a country that is multi-aligned, not only because it is a political choice, but also because there aren't too many options. For a country its size, for a country its population, for a country its location and history, multi-alignment is naturally. What else would you have this country choose? A military alliance with the United States, that's simply unworkable in the sort of context and location that India is in. So I think India has chosen a path of multiple alignments based on the issue at hand, simply because that is a natural choice available to India, and there aren't too many alternatives available to India at this point of time.
You know, Happymon, that's a very important point. For the last 5 to 10 years, especially since Prime Minister Modi came to power in 2014, one was getting a sense that a lot of our foreign policy decision-making was getting centered around the US. Even our exports were, in a large manner, centered around the US. Do you think what has happened today with the Trump administration, we may be able to do some damage control, get things back on track? And damage control, I don't mean just by the Indian side, by the US side as well. But for the long term, do you feel that the lesson for India is you cannot fully trust the United States? You cannot put your eggs in one basket. We need to have stable relations with China, stable relations with Russia, because in times of crisis, we're not sure where the US will come to us.
I think that is exactly the lesson that is being drawn here in India today at this point of time. Historically, there has been a narrative, a strong narrative in India that you cannot trust the United States of America beyond the point to come to your aid, come to your assistance. The United States is adept at dealing with various countries that are not necessarily positively disposed towards India. And because it is a major international power. So I think there is a certain wisdom in India that you cannot depend on the United States beyond a point. Having said that, I would also say the Indians also realize that India cannot depend entirely on Russia, for that matter. I have, in fact, written in Foreign Affairs itself 2 years ago that India is moving away from Russia. And I don't think a lot of Indians look at Russia as India's strategic future. When it comes to strategic priorities of the future, Indians look at the United States, Indians look at the European countries, other Asian countries like Japan or Korea or even Australia for that matter. So to that extent, I think Indians know what to pick from where and what choice to make vis-a-vis which country. But there is no question of this country, as far as I understand this country, choosing to be an ally, a military ally of the United States, because it knows from its history that that is not how superpowers behave in the region. The Americans have hurt Indian interests in the past as well. But let me add one more point to that. I think it is also important for the United States to realize India's worth in the region. If the United States continues to behave under Trump administration the manner it is behaving today, you're probably going to see a China that is aggressively rising in Asia. It won't be too long before we have a unipolar Asia with China at the top of the of the food chain here.
Right.
And that is not going to be a good thing for the United States of America. If China is able to gather that kind of power and sort of prominence in Asia, it won't be too long before they make a claim for the top position in the international system. So I think if the United States wants to behave in the manner it is behaving, without realizing who its fundamental, who its primary contradiction is, which is the People's Republic of China, it is going to be too bad for the United States as well and its strategies in the region.
Right. We don't have time, but one question that I had in mind was whether United States, while it doesn't want an extremely strong China in the region, does it also want to check India's rise as a power in the region as well? Maybe that's a conversation for another day. Thanks, Happymon, for joining us. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Global Lens. Many thanks for watching. Goodbye.